percussion?
Lots of old folks on the Mississippi. Lots of folks work while the white man plays. Pulling them boats from the dawn to sunset. Get no rest till the judgment day. Don't look up and don't look down. You don't just make the white boss frown. Bend your knee, bow your head. Pull that rope until you're dead. Let me go away from the Mississippi. Let me go away from the white man's horse. Show me that stream that is called the Jordan. There's the old stream that I long
August 2nd, 1990, Saddam Hussein's forces crashed through the defences of oil-rich Kuwait. In fear of an Iraqi invasion into Saudi Arabia, the United States and her coalition allies poured into the Arabian Peninsula to form a deterrent that would be known as Desert Shield. The result was a series of diplomatic talks, negotiations and counter-negotiations that rapidly declined into a no-hope situation. On August 17th, 1991, Desert Shield became Desert Storm. The conflict was witnessed by millions through the eye of CNN and the BBC, showing propaganda of the systematic eradication of Saddam's forces by a coalition far superior in technological, political, and economic power. However, what was little known was that from the outset the war was engineered, controlled, and manipulated by an elite group. A group which had created the illusion of a man with power, at the head of a million-strong army, on the verge of going nuclear. A man who had gained control over 1/5 of the world's oil overnight. However, in reality, he was merely a pawn, in amongst many pawns, just a puppet in a grand master plan, with the Gulf War as a well-orchestrated stepping stone. The orchestrators of the war were by no means strangers to controlling major world events. In fact, they have done so for centuries. From the shadows, they have engineered every major war, revolution, and recession. They control everything you read, everything you hear, and everything you see. They have managed to indoctrinate an entire populace to their way of thinking, and have infiltrated key positions in places of authority. And it is from the shadows that they have created a new political order, a new economic order, and more sinister, a new religious order. Their ultimate aim is total global domination, and they will stop at nothing to reach their goal, the goal that was outlined in a speech given by former President of the United States, George Bush.
What is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea, a new world order.
However, the origins of this global plan were not created in the offices of the White House. In reality, their roots lay in another war. This time, the year is 1095, and the place, Clermont, France.
I'm next, folks. You lucky people. But he's here right in front of me. Oscar, what are you doing with that phone? This is no time to call up women. I can't get up there and pull him off. Close the curtains, Oscar. Oscar, if you insist on phoning, get one for me.
From birth with a completely different worldview. They see things from a completely different side. They're in on the know from a very early age. They know they're different, number one. They know that they have an incredible power. They know they can never tell the ordinary people the scams that are pulled over the ordinary people in order to control them and move them into the next stage or phase of the Great Society, as they sometimes term it. Mm-hmm. They can't come out and tell us outright that they want a lot of us just to simply stop breeding. They have published in their own books, especially back in the early 1900s, that they want the right to say who will breed and who will not breed.
So can we say then, are you suggesting that there's a kind of, let's use the term, spiritual ideal with maybe secret societies, and where they're doing this because they're thinking at the long term that this is going to fulfill something for them in the future, maybe in the next life or something, and this is their job and they've been chosen to do this? That kind of thing?
But there's no doubt that in these families, tradition is something they often couch it in, the family traditions, and they're tremendously proud of their ancestry. If you go to the nobility of Britain and you look at the genealogies, the standard genealogies of the elite of even the ancient world, of selective, very special mating. They mate with power. They don't mate with someone they simply fall head over heels with.
Like in the days of kings and queens and stuff.
Yeah, so you marry power, and what you're doing is marrying certain traits. Now, people in ancient times who got to the top and slaughtered and took over with their families, remember, put up to kings or princes or whatever, they tend to be very ruthless people. Very cunning, but ruthless. In other words, they're psychopathic by nature. And if you go into the religions, the ancient religions too, they're basically pantheistic in a sense. And when you understand pantheism,
Many gods? Is that what that means? Many gods?
What it is in pantheism, and it's couched in the mysteries. All the mysteries down through the ages are the same mystery. It's couched. You get a good example in, for instance, Egypt, where they had all these different deities. In other words, you have specialized deities for specialized functions. You'll find this even in say, the Old Testament. If you go into the Old Testament as well, you get many, many clues of different deities that specialized over certain areas of human life or nature. And in Egypt, eventually, the real higher religion that the nobility already understood was brought out by Akhenaten, who said that all these deities are really one deity. They're like special parts of the same deity. So pantheism, in an extent, has always had this fight between both beliefs combined into one. The ordinary people like to have special deities. I'm in trouble in this way, therefore I need this deity to help me out.
Right. Even in the Catholic Church, I grew up in the Catholic Church years ago, Alan Watt, they would have a special kind of saints to help you find something, or I don't know, there was all of these different kind of people that had specialized in helping you with a particular problem.
That's correct, and they did take a lot of the old paganism into the Catholic Church because the early church wanted converts, and they had to relate to the people who knew paganism. In fact, you'll find a lot of the Catholic saints really were just directly taken straight from paganism and brought up to date for Christianity.
Here's an email from Steve in South Carolina. Please ask Alan Watt if the Club of Rome that he has mentioned is any connection with the Vatican, and how does the Vatican play out in the New World Order kind of one world government? Well,
the Vatican, we have to remember that in every major player's writings or books or their biographies, they'll always mention at the top, talk about world leaders and so on, the real movers and shakers. They always mention that religion is very important for controlling the public. And they've mentioned the Catholic Church, and that they wouldn't just destroy the Catholic Church, they'd have to use it, because why destroy something that already leads millions of people across the planet? So you use it, and we've seen the changes of the Catholic Church. There was a political religious power for many, many centuries. You must remember this. And it was ruthless to its enemies. And it did have enemies. It had enemies even in the Middle Ages that tried to take over and replace the Catholic Church. The Cathars and Albigensians, the Bogomils, they were all the same people with pagan ideas. The people thought were eradicated. They thought they died off 1,000 years prior to that. But here they are, they turn up in Europe, and they actually have their secret societies that became the Rosicrucians and then became Freemasonry as we know it today.
What is your opinion about the Bible, the origins of the Bible, when it was written, who wrote it, and its significance in our culture? It seems like it sure gets a lot of credibility wherever you go.
It's credibility because within it, like all religions, they'll take in philosophies that have to make sense to people in some areas. Everything that they want you into must make sense to bring you in, and then you find a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense, but you're supposed to take it on faith. And that's where the con is always. When you can't understand something, there's something else going on. But so they used to couch it under philosophies. Now, in ancient times, definitely in the Middle Eastern areas, you had these pagan societies, and the idea was whenever you were in trouble, you would call down a deity, but you had to go to a priest to call down a special deity that knew its name and how to bind it, to use it.
You needed an intermediary kind of thing.
Yes, you needed the guy who knew the formula. He knew how to keep the safe from the deities. The whole idea with the genie in the bottle, out would come the genie, and the genie would try to outsmart you, so you had to get its name. You find the same thing in the Old Testament. There's lots of little clues in the Old Testament. Now, the Old Testament really is there to give you a system which question. It simply tells you how it is. In the Old Testament, if you understand it, even in Genesis, people get confused. They say, there's two beginnings here. There's man, and God creates man and woman, and in his perfect image creates he them. And then it's almost like he forgot that, and then they go on to the creation of Adam and Eve. Mm-hmm. Well, in the higher religion, there is only two kinds of beings on the planet. There's man and there's animals, and Adam and Eve would be in amongst the animals.
Amongst the animals?
Yeah. And that's why you have two beginnings in Genesis. So the clue is in the perfection. God created man and woman in his perfect image created he them. They were perfect. In other words, they were like a complete clone of the deity with power. But then it said there was no one to till the soil. So then he created Adam.
Well, who was behind the whole biblical movement and writing of it and really pushing it over the years as being the book? Well, everything is pushed, remember, by power, money. Money is what pushes every idea across the public. The whole culture now is dependent upon those who have the money and media, and they put money towards causes, charitable causes like religions, etc. Mm-hmm. That's always been the way of it. And if you understand, as I say, that power, to have power and maintain power, you must have control of the minds of the public. So you must give out a religion for all ages. Even Gorbachev, Michael Gorbachev, who runs one of the big movements towards environmentalism and depopulation and the happy planet idea, has said in his own books, one of them was called Towards a New Civilization, he said, I am an atheist, he said. But then he says, we, meaning the people involved in this global structure, we are creating a new world religion for the world, and it must be based on a form of earth worship. Well, this is the whole greening idea, the children in school getting brainwashed into you're only part of the planet, we're all one big whole combination idea. This is what they're creating for the future, and it's backed by all the big bankers, all the philanthropic organizations, foundations. Where the money is how your future is going to be, and that's what you're going to believe. Yeah. But in general, I mean, the greening of the planet, I mean, do you consider that a negative thing, and people are using more creative energy? And
well, if you were to believe that was their purpose.
I see.
You understand, these guys have always been liars. And have never told the public the truth or the real reasons. If you look at the Soviet idea, let's take the Soviet system. Now remember, collectivism is what they based it on. Where a special elite at the top pretend to dish out the materials of production to the public, and all the public pretend to work for the state, and the state pretends to pay you. You see, that's the whole idea of the big con. Mm-hmm. The idealism is what grabs people off like a religion for a utopia, but it's never what they claim it's going to be. It's really a drab, dreary system where you're terrified when you're hauled off to a gulag somewhere. This never changes.
It's gone on since the beginning of time, hasn't it?
Yes. Now, what they've always wanted at the top is the right, you see. See, that was the guise of a small elite to hold not only the means of production under the pretense of holding it for the world, but also the distribution of production. That means everything that you need to live on. Now, George Orwell said when a group has the power to dish out what you need to survive, right? He says you're now under tyranny. And when they call it a privilege to have this or this food or whatever, you're under a tyranny. And this is the same agenda under many names that have tried down through the years into this new society, the greening, we're all in it together idea. We're all in this war together to save the world, and we're all going to be happy in some utopia. No, we're not going to be happy in some utopia. These guys are liars from the beginning. The same bankers who've just ripped us off and got rewarded for doing so are the same guys who put the money towards these philanthropic causes.
And carbon is the enemy, and now we know from our education through Andrew Goss, Alan Watt, that Goldman Sachs is behind the whole cap and trade thing, and they are the people that will benefit from the cap and trade.
Yes, they are. And not only that, the Lord Rothschild put forward, he's high in this big movement, I read the articles on the air from the British newspapers. He put forward the whole idea of the personal carbon taxes. Now, it's not only corporations or countries, it's going right down to the personal level.
Rothschild, he kicked off the carbon thing?
That's right. And see, they've been planning this for about 40 years. We didn't even hear about it the last couple of years. And he said, too, that all these world carbon taxes will go through his bank, his family bank in Switzerland. Sure. Isn't that wonderful?
These guys are good, man. And so you think the carbon thing, that their goal is to get it down to, so they'll send Patrick a bill for whatever he's using. This.
That's in the major media now. I've read it from the air just the other night, in fact.
Yeah, I mean, there's actually places in the country, and I'm not sure what states, but I believe there's 2 or 3 where they've got away with taxing people for collecting rainwater.
Oh, they've gone even further. See, the United Nations is the biggest front organization ever devised by the Royal Institute of International Affairs and the Council on Foreign Relations. They pushed it into existence as a front, an embryo to bring this world together. Every law that you have in environment for the last 40, 50 years, right down to your plumbing, your septic, your house codes and all come from the United Nations to every country, and it's signed into law without debate.
So what is the story on the UN, Alan Watt? Who put them together, and who controls the United Nations?
Well, you have to go again to Carl Quigley. He's the man who really put it out for the first time to the public. He wasn't just a professor, he was an advisor to the Pentagon and to the the Department of State, to the high diplomatic offices and so on. He was a man who chose Rhodes Scholars to be sent over to Britain for world government, like Bill Clinton. He chose him. And he talks about the history of this group, from the Lord Milner Society in Britain. They're all bankers. And they became the Royal Institute for International Affairs. It's a chartered private organization that has rules the media. Every major member of the media in every country is a member of it. And in the foreign countries, they call themselves the Council on Foreign Relations. So it's the same bunch. They go back to the late 1800s. And
I heard on the radio this morning that they're really getting feisty, the UN, about this whole global warming thing, and they want to really get something going.
Oh yeah, I mean, we have to run our lives, you see, from the experts. Now, many of the members of the Royal Institute for International Affairs, in fact, pretty well all of their members, gave us our history for the whole 20th century. They wrote the books on histories and on science. And so guys like Lord Bertrand Russell said they will train the public that they cannot think for themselves without the advice of an expert. And that is the scientific society they have brought into existence. We have scientists telling us all this kind of stuff. But what we don't look into is, say, the panel on climate change at the United Nations, the International Panel on Climate Change, IPCC they call it. This is where all this climate change stuff is coming from. They've banked and counted, put everything on this whole idea of climate change. Unfortunately, their warming hasn't gone on, and so now that they're calling it climate change. Well, the world's always had climate changes.
Oh, I see. So
the weather.
They had to change it because they got the timing wrong on the sunspots or whatever, that they had to change it from global warming to climate change.
Well, now they've also come out just to cover their bases and said, well, it actually might cool within this warming period. It might cool for the next 20 years and then warm again.
These guys are good, boy. We're talking with Alan Watt, cuttingthroughthematrix.com. Just a plethora of information that Mr. Watt works on tirelessly for many years. CDs, DVDs, and books, and all kinds of stuff. So if you're interested in learning more about these kinds of things, this is a great stop for you. CuttingThroughTheMatrix.com. You know, Andrew Goss, our money mentor, Alan Watt, has mentioned Tragedy and Hope by Carol Quigley so often. I think it's time that I've read that. I mean, that sounds like it's quite a book.
It really is. It's the only book that has been put out. And he said the same thing. There is a parallel government, he said. It's existed for 60 years, he said. It's run by very powerful, rich people. They have a world agenda. He lays out the agenda. Then he tells you how they were achieving their goals in his day. and prior to his life, he goes through the reasons for the wars, who financed them, what their goals were, to bring in this unified planet under their particular rule, under various guises, and we're living through the predictions, the plan, not just predictions, but the plan that they set up a long time ago.
Let's get to this one. This one is Robert. Please ask Alan Watt what he knows about the formation of the FDA, or the American Medical Association, and allopathic medicine. He said, I understand that the Rockefellers had something to do with it about 100 years ago. Does Alan Watt have any insight on that? Because it's certainly a current thing to talk about, healthcare.
Yes, I mean, the whole allopathic idea was put out by the Rockefellers themselves. Not just the Rockefellers, they had hundreds of people working full-time in a massive organization, even way back yonder. And the idea was to bring in, again, science as the new master in medicine, and as long as they controlled it, mind you. Mm-hmm. And from that day to this day, all of the major pharmaceutical companies have members from the Rockefeller Foundation working full-time. So it's all the pharmas across the world are really one big company under the rule. And what the Rockefellers did was to standardize a particular education for doctors, so they all get the same training. They're basically fronts, whether they know it or not, for the pharma companies. All they do is prescribe. And also to eliminate, the whole key to everything for taking over the world, in any sphere, money, medicine, all the sciences, agriculture, is monopoly. You must have monopolization, and you must make sure that only your method is taught through the universities. That's the key to it, to eliminate all competition, all alternatives, and eventually, sure enough, after a generation or two or three generations, if you were to mention any alternative to what's out there in the drug industry, even the average person will think you're crazy. They've been taught to believe that doctors are somehow holier than thou, and they walk on water, again, through propaganda, through fictional TV dramas and stuff. This is ongoing even today. There's more medical dramas out there and movies than anything. And
the doctor kind of really knows his stuff because he's gone to medical school.
He goes to medical school for science. You see, this thing you cannot dispute. This science is taught, and of course, as we know, when we go into the drug industry, it's a horror show. It's an absolute horror show. They've even had documentaries on the CBC here. That's like a BBC version for Canada, run by the government, where the big pharmas they've always done this, they hire writers to write positive reports on all their drugs, and to sort of negate or downplay all the side effects. And these are professional writers that do this all the time for them.
And a lot of them have gotten caught over the last couple of years in, rigging these tests and stuff.
They do it all the time with every particular drug. But again, too, remember that what their long-term goal isn't just money and profit. If you are into money and profit, you're always fearing and eliminating competition. It's also the end product, where they've told us that they want to bring into this world what they call world peace. That was the front under communism too. They said, when they win, it'll be terminated. In other words, the termination of war will happen when there's world peace. World peace meant the absence of all competition or opposition.
Yeah, so without that, without a lot of debt and competition, then you have no reason to kill each other.
Yes, and they talked about drugging the whole of society, if need be. I mean, at one time, I can remember in my parents' day, people would think maybe 3 or 4 times about taking an aspirin, and then say, no, I won't. Because people were suspicious of drugs. They're not natural things for your body to start with. But now we go from the simple aspirin to much more complex drugs on a daily basis.
It's a huge... So Alan, was it in the early 1900s when the Rockefellers brought this allopathic idea out?
Yes, it was.
And they were behind it. They were behind this.
Oh, they were behind it, and they could understand. See, the Rockefellers themselves, obviously, 1 or 2 people could not sit and plan all the different areas that they got into immediately. You're talking really about an organization, and the Rockefellers themselves part of it, but they're more of a front. One or two people. It's like being a president of the United States. You could never learn every department that you have underneath you in your whole term in office. It's impossible. There's so many departments. It's the same with the Rockefellers. They have fingers in every pie across the board in social life. And old Rockefeller himself, he still concentrates mainly on the depopulation issue. But the rest of his foundation is into every aspect of life. You're looking at an organization that has many tentacles, many fronts, and it's out for total domination of the planet. There's no doubt about this whatsoever.
And are you concerned about the availability of alternatives? Of course, we've heard about this thing called Codex for years, and people are getting, they're getting hammered here and there. They've always attacked MDs that are holistic and doing things, but it doesn't seem to be. I don't know. They don't seem to be able to get away with much, Alan Watt, because there's so many people into alternative medicine. Do you think there's so many that they're not going to be able to control it or not?
Oh no, these characters never give up. And you should never relax for a minute, because when we think they've won something, they're already bringing it back under a different guise or a different direction. There's no doubt that everything in this world, in this new world order, and this term is being used now by prime ministers openly at the G20. Like Brown, he used it.
Sure.
And it's a new world order where you'll be ordered from birth to death to serve the world state. That's the whole purpose of it, serving. That's why Obama brought in service, mandatory voluntary service. Canada's following suit, and so is Britain. So it's to be a world where you serve the world state for the good of society, as they like to couch it. But it's also a world where you will not you will not have a private business. Eventually, that will go by the wayside too, like the Soviet system. And all medicine will be controlled by a central world authority. It has to be always central. That's the whole key of what used to call communism, was centralization.
Kind of like a super FDA.
Yes, and again, you see, you cannot have anybody outside the loop doing their own thing in medicine under their system. So therefore, everything has to be regulated and authorized by the United Nations. The World Health Organization at the United Nations was set up to do just this, to be the chief for all medical purposes, and that's the key to it.
Is that why WHO, World Health Organization, is so out front on this whole swine flu thing?
Yes, and it's giving it incredible prominence for one thing. So they're putting it up to its proper stature. It's rising up to its proper stature as it was designed to do. And they've said in their own world meetings, if you go back, that they were set up to be the world health authority that will guide the rest of the world under mandate. So that's happening as we live. And eventually, everything that you need, whether it's food or whatever, you'll have to go to a government agency. When you want medicine, you'll have to go to a registered medical doctor, approved doctor for everything. And that includes vitamins. They want to make sure that even vitamins you'll have to get a prescription for.
So, folks, that gives a lot more weight to what we do here at One Radio Network, thinking that our ultimate goal is that we're not going to need anything except the right food. That's what we're working towards, because we'll prepare for the best and hope for the worst, and if a lot of stuff gets taken away, we won't need it, because we'll know we've had our body in such shape that if we can grow the right foods, then we're going to be okay. Here's an email from Heather out your way, Alan Watt, in Montreal. Hello, I just finished the book Dope Inc. by Lyndon LaRouche, which was well researched about the drug trade and how it was backed by royalty, particularly Britain. Can Alan comment on this? Thank you.
Yes, drugs have always been used by the elite on the public down through centuries. So it's poisons as well. If they want to eliminate people too, they often put stuff in the streams, etc. If they want to eliminate a certain part of the population. Starvation was another, just cutting off the food supplies. But drugs, definitely. I mean, it's out in the open in the history books now, thanks to the work and the pushing for a lot of people, that the British royalty and a lot of the American, I call them royalty or aristocracy, such as those from Yale University, the Bushes, in fact, and the Kerrys and these boys, they all made millions of dollars off the drug trade when they were taking down China. They took China down by importing lots of dope, opium, bales of opium from India, and dumping it on the shores of China, addicting the populations to bring China down to its knees, which they did very successfully. This is now all out in the history books for the first time. So it only took 100 odd years to get it, 150 years to get in the history books. But George Orwell, for instance, his name was Blair. He was a member of an intergenerational diplomatic family for the British Crown. And his father, he said in his own biography, his father was the superintendent or the main chutzpah, you might say, for the British opium company in Burma. And when that was brought up in Parliament in Britain at the time, in the 1930s, by a guy I think it was called Thompson, the member of Parliament, the public didn't know that Britain still had opium companies. And when they've investigated into it, all the members of the shareholders of the company, now they were using British armies to protect it and taxpayers' money for farmers and stuff. They didn't know that all the members were members of the royalty and the cousins and so on of all the lesser royalty. That these are the only ones who were shareholders in this world corporation.
Ellen White, what do you think the idea or the paradigm that we are not told about the real story in Afghanistan? What's going on there? Why all this interest in Afghanistan? It's
partly because out of all the areas out there in the countries, Afghanistan has been a tribal society, many different tribes with long-standing traditions of a pecking order, you might say. Mm-hmm. Everyone in their place, everyone owns their own area, that's it. It will not fit into this New World Order very easily. Very ancient traditions, ingrained culture, is very, very old culture. But also is strategic. It's a very strategic place for them. We're going to remember that Britain was the first country to try and take over that area, and they sent in armies in there into the Khyber Pass, again for the opium fields.
When was that?
They were in there in the 1800s. Mm-hmm. And many countries have tried since then. Now, under the Cold War farce, I call it the farce, because it was planned how long it would last, and it was how long even the communist system would last before they changed the West. And you find that the Soviets eventually went in there too, mm-hmm. and were hammering them for years with the aid of the U.S., and once they finished, the U.S. is in there hammering them. So it doesn't matter which group you get to hammer the people, they want them down. But the first thing that Britain did, that George Bush did once they got in there, was to order the farmers to go back to growing poppies, because it was forbidden under the Taliban rule. They banned poppy growing and opium. So George Bush okayed it again. That was in all the major media at the time. But it's also strategic, geopolitically strategic for pipelines crossing their land into other countries. They have these far-reaching plans.
Oh, you mean like oil coming from the Mideast to China and places like that?
Absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's the main reason for it, yeah.
Yeah. And the one I just, there's so much out there about it, and I hesitate to go in there because it's such a black hole. But give us your opinion, Alan Watt's opinion, the short story on what this whole Israeli thing is about, and how they seem to be at the center of so much of this, this war that is brewing and seems to be in our consciousness for the next few years.
We have to go into again geopolitics. Geopolitics is a goal that might take 100 years to achieve your goal. Britain was the master of geopolitics and strategy for taking countries down. They spent 100 years taking down India, getting all the different tribes and supplying all the different tribes to fight each other. And then once they were war-weary and broken up and destroyed, Britain basically took the whole country over.
100 years?
Yeah, pretty well. And that's how you work out how you take down societies and then reorganize them under your rule. It's long-term strategy. Now, Zbigniew Brzezinski is a big key player in geopolitics. And up on YouTube, and it's on my site too, you'll see him in the 70s. In Afghanistan, for instance, And you'll hear him saying this, that this is a holy war you're fighting against the Russians, you see. It's a holy war, it's a jihad. And now, of course, he's out there with his geopolitics trying to take the Afghanis down, now that they've fought the Russians. I mean, every country is used, but Israel, they needed a place in the Middle East. And it's interesting if you look into the history of it, because one of the overseers for Britain, the lieutenant governor, or general as they call it, who's got the royal authority of the British Crown, was Sir Ronald Storrs. And he was in there in the 1930s. He gives the history in his own book. It's called Orientations, of their goals for that region. And he says, and they were importing primarily Jewish people from Russia at that time into Israel in the 1930s. And he said, now, you've got to understand the British history, because they've kept Ireland fighting each other with Protestants and Catholics since the days of Queen Elizabeth I. That's beautiful geopolitics. Divide and conquer, and you can always come in and restore the peace and conquer.
Selling guns to both sides. And
geopolitics. Now, in Northern Ireland, what became Northern Ireland, Britain put in a lot of hard Presbyterian, loyal to the Crown groups, and that became Ulster in Northern Ireland. And they've always been totally faithful to the British Crown against the Catholic Church and against any foreign dominion, as they call it. They're completely loyal to the British Crown, regardless of what the Crown does. And this man, Storrs, in Israel, said to the Lieutenant Governor, he says, we are setting up an Ulster in the Middle East. In other words, a perpetual thorn in the sides of everyone around them. And that was his own words in his own book.
That just keeps the kind of pot boiling.
It does. Because they had to. See, these guys knew back then they wanted to take a world over. They wanted to take over the resources of the world, and that's what we're seeing today. It's all a resource war as it gets put into fewer and fewer hands, the hands it was intended to get to, and it'll all be dished out to us piecemeal, and it'll be a privilege to get food eventually. But this is a war on the entire planet, long-range, geopolitical, and there's no doubt about it. You see, the main enemy, number one, and this was admitted by Aldous Huxley. There's a good interview by Mike Wallace going way back with Huxley. And Aldous Huxley was a big player, again, descended from the Darwin, Sir Thomas Huxley crew. His descendants are still going. Sir Crispin Tickle's in charge of the Ultimate Population Trust for depopulating the planet. But Aldous Huxley says to Wallace, apart from his little statement, he says, where a small minority can take over and control the world using sciences, he also says that the main enemy of this world dominion, this global movement, has always been the Catholic Church. It's just because the Catholic Church, even though it's a geopolitical, it's also geopolitical. Obviously, it was a world society, but even though it was a power structure as well into politics, that was his main failing in a sense. He went into too much politics and forgot the spiritual. He said it was the only opposition at that time in the 50s and 60s to world collectivism or communism. This is the guise that this rich men's group is going under. It's for the good of all. Communism, collectivism. He says once that's gone, there's nothing to stop it. Well, you see, that's already happened. The Catholic Church was completely infiltrated. It had been before that. Malachi Martin wrote excellent books about the downfall of the Catholic Church. He was a Jesuit priest at one time. He also was an advisor to two popes and one of the cardinals in Rome. And he said in his last book, Windswept House, that now it was totally taken over by the societies, as he called them, and he writes about it in that particular book. So the Catholic Church, although it's destroyed as an opposition force, is now to be used for a force for world peace as part of this whole world movement now. It's a patsy, it's a pawn.
We're with Alan Watt here on a Tuesday morning, September 22nd, 888-663-6386. Email Patrick at oneradionetwork.com. We'll end with the whole financial stuff. We, as you know, Alan Watt, I mean, stories circle the internet daily about the financial crash that's coming and how China and people are dumping dollars and etc. And our man Andrew Goss suggests that he believes this kind of talk is merely a smokescreen, and that these people really are all kind of working together for one goal, and China knows exactly what it's doing. And if you actually look at the numbers, they have not decreased their purchasing of treasuries at all, and they're actually using treasuries to buy stuff around the world, buy resources as collateral. And Andrew Goss argues that they know exactly what they're doing.
Yep.
And if they wanted to let this thing crash, they could have let that long ago. 9/11. Do you generally agree with that assumption, or do you think they are really fighting with each other and this dollar is going to totally crash and burn? What's your opinion?
No, there's no fighting with China whatsoever. In fact, the Western bankers created modern China from its inception of modernization.
That's what Mr. Goss says, yes.
Yes, and it was the Western powers, again, through the United Nations and agreement through the GATT, the GATT treaty, that every country was sold out for being producers, because it was decided back in the 30s to set China up and make them the world producer, the world manufacturer. Now, after World War II, in World War II, they set up Japan to be the ones who would hold the debt for the U.S. That was arranged by the big bankers.
What do you mean hold the debt, Alan?
Well, they would buy the bonds.
Okay, they'd be the one buying the treasuries.
Yes.
Okay.
And so they were set up under the plan that devised during World War II for a post-war Japan, and they said that they'd set them up as the manufacturer of all technology, mainly electronics at that time.
So that was their bonus for having this war with us.
That was a payoff to an extent. They always make sure they have a purpose for the country they're going to use and then take down, then build up again in a different area.
Interesting.
Now, China was totally financed by the West into its modernization status. You see, China, remember, the United Nations has said that China is the model state for the world. In other words, we've all followed China on its one-child per family stuff. It's still a communist government. There's no democracy there. You do what you're told by authorities there, and that's it. So it is the model state for us all to follow. It was created by the Western banking powers. China didn't come up and pull itself up by the bootstraps and say we're going to be a modern industrial country. It took the GATT treaty, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, where every manufacturer in the Western Hemisphere was pretty well forced to go over to China because once it started to build in China, manufacture in China, and other companies had already gone there, you couldn't compete with them, so you had to move there. And even the clothing manufacturers all moved there too eventually. That was all done by our own politicians meeting at the top and signing these deals into law, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. And not only that, by the way, the average American and Canadian doesn't even know, and the whole European the community, they don't know that we paid for every factory that was moved over to China. We paid for the retooling or setting up in China through our tax money. We guaranteed to pay off any profits that they would lose during that setup period for up to 10 years. That was all done by what we thought as our politicians. Well, we've been under totalitarianism for a long, long time.
So they are all in it together.
Absolutely. There is no such thing as democracy. In fact, in the Club of Rome, they said we have to be post-democratic. It's too untidy. Well, guess what? We've never had democracy.
How does India fit into all of this?
India, again, you have to look at the big boys and what they say. Now, they have technocrats, as quickly called them, the ones who have more power than any politician, that do the real work behind the scenes, and that's their payoff. They're well rewarded. They know they have the real power to get things done in the parallel government. Now, Brzezinski talked about them, so did Kissinger. They talked about the up-and-coming emerging countries. And he said Brazil was one, and then another one was India. And we're all scratching our heads saying, well, what's happening in these countries? Well, see, it's because we don't know the big plans that are made for these countries. There is not a country in this world that can bring itself up by the bootstraps. It cannot happen. It takes massive injection of money via the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, to make anything happen. And that's what they've done with these countries. They have big goals for the whole of Latin America. That's why the U.S. has been pounding them for 40-odd years to make sure that they get the right people in to bring in the new United America structure. The European Union was the first union. The next union was to be the Union of the Americas, and then the Pacific region conglomerate as well, including Australia, that's getting lumped in with China right now as we speak. So Karl Marx wrote about this back in the 1840s. He said a united Europe with governments subservient to a world body, a united Americas will follow it, subservient to a world body, and then a Pacific Rim region subservient to the world body. It's all going according to plan, very old plan, well publicized in their own books actually. It's just that the general public are kept spinning by the media. That's the job of the middleman. The media means the middle.
Keeping their eyes off of the ball of what's really going on.
Absolutely.
Well, whatever they can come up. So then you see a Canada, U.S., Mexico partnership somewhere in our future.
Oh, it's here. In Canadian television, the CBC, as I say, is the BBC version of for Canada. It's the same format. It's run by the government. When they did the first open signing for the NAFTA, for the integration of the Americas, that was publicized on television here. All they had in the U.S. papers was the three amigos meet in Waco, Texas, to sign an agreement. The two presidents and the prime minister. But here they actually went deeper into it, and they showed you some of the questions of the reporters to the three amigos. And they were asked, we've watched Europe integrate together under a common government, is that what's happening here? And then they kerfuffled around it, and then the reporter came on to tell you what it said afterwards. He says, yes, that is the goal. He says, it has to be this way. Well, the reporter was a member of the Council of Foreign Relations. That is their goal.
So does that ultimately mean lower wages?
Yes.
In general, lower wages because you just kind of lower the standard of living?
That's what the whole greening thing is about. You're seeing your standard of living getting reduced now under the guise of saving the world, less carbon output and so on. You're going to see a flattened society, a collectivist society across the world. No middle class, by the way. They've said that in all their writings. And the NAFTA agreement has been signed every year. They meet to sign it, to integrate it further. This is what they did with Europe. They called it creating closer ties until, lo and behold, you're suddenly under a new parliament. That's happening right now. The last signature for the total integration is to be done next year, 2010.
So I'm curious, as much as you know and research this, just amazing the knowledge that you carry around, the information. Why then do you choose to live in Canada, and will you stay there?
I don't know where I'll stay, but Canada was the handiest place for me, first of all, to get out of a collectivist Britain. Britain was already utterly socialist. It didn't matter what so-called party was in power. It had been socialist from the days of George Orwell in the 40s.
They're truly going through it now, aren't they?
Oh, you wouldn't believe how it truly is. It's a collectivist society run by the small. The government's in charge of everything. Every agency that was a service, and that's the key to collectivism. Lenin said this. He says, well, we'll create all these services, health service, child's care services, etc. They all become authorities in the end, and that's what you have now. You're run by authorities from every angle.
So, what do you think this, in closing, what do you think this healthcare thing, the real story is about this?
Healthcare will go the way of even the sci-fis that they brought out to show us what would happen in the future. Healthcare is to go into a mandatory system where you will be weighed like an animal. I'm not kidding, it's been in the newspapers. They want to actually weigh everybody under the guise of the war on obesity that comes from the United Nations.
There could be a war on fat now, right? War on
fat, and it'll be height. IQ is also coming into it now to the old eugenics plan. They want to test everyone's IQ. They actually want that already they're aborting children under the possibility that there could be inherited traits and defects. Now they're stepping it up to, well, it might even have allergies or asthma, so let's just abort the child. Well, the next step, according to the American Psychological Association, the old eugenics plan, well, it might have criminal tendencies. This is where they're going. It's a creeping, incremental thing, but they're really getting their way, and mums are listening to them because we've all been taught to listen to the scientists, the experts, you see, and you don't realize that you're on a total eugenics path written about, and look into the eugenic societies of America, run by the Rockefellers. They actually had mandatory abortion in a lot of the U.S. states right up into the 1970s, and the public don't even know this.
And so a lot of folks are concerned about the whole combining of the records, electronic, to be all part of this new healthcare thing, yes, with whatever comes out.
Absolutely. If you're going to have cattle, see, we're cattle. If you're going to have cattle and own the herd, you're going to make sure that the kind of breed that you want and health that they want, certain weight, certain height, IQ, not too bright, that's what you're after.
Got to tag them too, so you know where they are. Them.
Absolutely.
Put a chip in them so you know where they are.
Yes.
Well, Alan, you're always a joy to talk to and always fun, and gets our little brain waves going there to think about some other things and figure out a way how to protect ourselves as we move forward here. Tell folks about what they'll find on your website, Cutting Through the Matrix.
They'll find the books I have for sale. They're different from other books. I show you codings and stuff that's even interwoven in our language that's used by the big boys themselves, often openly in the newspapers, but we don't see it until you're taught to see it. I've got hundreds of free audios for downloads where I go into the histories of this kind of movement and the big players behind it down through the different generations to the present. And I tell you where they're going from their own writings. I don't guess about things. I use their own books and biographies. Yeah.
So you're constantly researching?
Oh, constantly, yeah.
Up in Canada, constantly research. This is your job, right?
That's it.
There you go. Cutting Through the Matrix, Helen Watt. Thanks for your time, sir, and we'll keep in touch with you.
Thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure.